and welcome to another episode of Quarantine Cooking with Alix. I'm your host, Alix Traeger. On tonight's special episode, we'll be going over 5 recipes that work beautifully if you somehow find yourself living through a global pandemic. Hey, it could happen. These 5 recipes, in no particular order, utilize ingredients that you most likely already have on hand. Because hey, if a global pandemic does strike, you won't be able to go to the grocery store. These recipes are timeless, easy, simple, basic, and require very little skill at all. I would know. I made them. Alright, let's get started. For our first pandemic-friendly recipe of the night, we have a delectable potato-crusted quiche. This recipe is great for those who happen to have a couple of old potatoes in the bottom of their produce bin in their fridge. What's pandemic-friendly about this quiche is that it uses potatoes for the crust. Making your own crust can be tricky, as flour is hard to come by in a global pandemic. Slicing your potato into thin rounds enables you to lay them delicately as a crust in your pie dish. If you choose not to cut them in small rounds, you could also grate your potato into hash browns. It works just the same. Don't let the name intimidate you, as a quiche is really just eggs with some stuff in it. In this case, the stuff I'm referring to is cheese, green onion, tomato, and bacon. But feel free to customize it based on what you have on hand. In a global pandemic, you can't be too picky. Play around with the seasonings, turn up the spice. There are no rules in a global pandemic, except for staying home, of course. Pre-baking your potato crust will help ensure the potatoes cook through before you add in your eggs. This dish can be enjoyed at any time of the day, for breakfast, for lunch, for an afternoon snack, and for dinner. It also could be a dessert. In a global pandemic, anything goes. This next recipe is one that is widely known and loved as a comfort food. In case of a global pandemic, it's important to surround yourself with foods that comfort you. A 1-skillet chicken pot pie. 1 skillet because in a global pandemic, no one wants to clean 2 skillets. You'll want to start by cooking your chicken completely in your skillet before moving on to the rest of the ingredients of the pot pie, as no one can afford to get salmonella poisoning in a global pandemic. For this pot pie, we're using onions, garlic, potato cubes, and frozen peas and carrots. You can sub in or swap out any of these ingredients. Once the vegetables are cooked, we'll add in our butter, flour, and chicken stock. This will help make our sauce. No one wants a dry chicken pot pie, especially not in a global pandemic. If you don't happen to have a pie crust in your fridge or freezer, feel free to make your own. The nice thing about a cast iron skillet is that you can use it on the stove and in the oven. They get very hot, so be careful, as you wouldn't want to burn yourself during a global pandemic. Chocolate croissants are known as one of the hardest things to make. This recipe will be sure to impress your friends. Virtually, of course, because you cannot see your friends during a global pandemic. Bakeries may also be among the businesses closed during a global pandemic, in which case this recipe would come in handy. There's not much you can control during a global pandemic, but keeping control of the temperature of your environment while making croissants is essential. In order to achieve the layers classic to any good croissant, you'll need to start with a block of butter. Transferring your dough to the fridge in between the process of folding is also essential to achieve the layers. This will ensure your block of butter does not melt into your dough before baking. Each time you turn and fold your dough, the layers will grow exponentially, similar to how a virus grows exponentially during a global pandemic if people do not stay at home. It's not recommended to cut any corners in this recipe. You will need a couple of days to complete it. But during a global pandemic, most people have a couple of days. With this dough, you can make regular croissants, chocolate croissants, almond croissants, or any kind of croissants you'd like. It is recommended that when you eat your homemade croissant, you pretend you're in Paris, as traveling during a global pandemic is simply out of the question. This next dessert is a lot simpler than the last, a chocolate cookie crust peanut butter pie. I don't like to get too personal, but this was one of my favorite treats as a kid. Little did I know then that it would come in handy during a global pandemic. If you don't happen to have chocolate sandwich cookies on hand, otherwise known as Oreos, feel free to swap in graham crackers here. It works just as well. You want to crush your cookies into a fine powder and then mix with butter. Press the cookie crumbs down as tightly as possible into your pie dish as to form the crust. In my professional opinion, creamy peanut butter works best in the filling as to create a silky smooth finish. But if you do not have creamy, crunchy works too. The cream cheese will add a delicious tanginess to the filling, while the whipped cream will add some lightness and air. This is a no-bake pie, so it goes in your freezer for about an hour to set. Should there be a global pandemic, this recipe is great for kids, adults, and people like me, alone in their apartment indefinitely. This last recipe is another dessert, as eating dessert during a global pandemic is especially important. Once a global pandemic strikes, people are likely to hoard. Along with toilet paper, bananas are one of the first to go. Once things settle down about a week or so in and people realize that they have way too many bananas to possibly eat, banana bread comes in handy. Now this recipe is not just a simple banana bread, it's a banana bread bottom cheesecake. Yes, I added cheesecake on top of banana bread, because in the case of a global pandemic, calories don't count. Because this is a cheesecake, you'll want to use a springform pan. If you do not have a springform pan, I don't know what to tell you. As with any great banana bread, the riper the banana the better, as this is a source of sweetness. In this case, we're using a no-bake cheesecake, as we don't want to overcook the banana bread crust. Cheesecake and banana bread are two flavors that go excellently together, not just in a global pandemic. Finally, you can top your banana bread bottom cheesecake with a caramel drizzle. Global pandemics can be particularly sad, and caramel drizzles make everything better. I know it seems unlikely for a global pandemic to ever strike during your lifetime, but it's always important to be prepared. These 5 recipes are ones that may just come in handy when you least expect it. Be sure to tune in next week, where we will discuss 5 recipes to make during an alien invasion. I'm your host, Alix Traeger, and remember, if a global pandemic does strike, don't panic. Just stay home, wash your hands, and eat lots of good food.